This disturbing incident happened a month ago. During the middle of the night, my son Todd, who is about almost 6 years old at this point, went into my room and woke me up, which I thought, oh, he probably had a nightmare. I asked him if he had a nightmare. He slowly shook his head no and said, I think there is a ghost in my room. It didn't surprise me. He thinks that since a lot of children his age are scared of a lot of things like the dark or monsters under the bed. Have you and your friends been talking about ghost stories again at school? I said as I picked Todd up and put him on my lap and assured him there were no ghosts in this house. I put him beside me as we both slept in bed together. The next night around like 2 in the morning, Todd came into my room again saying about a ghost and how it was making a banging noise. I picked him up and took him to his room, putting him on his bed as I was searching for this ghost. I thought if I proved that there was no ghost anywhere in his room, maybe he wouldn't be scared and go back to bed. So I checked under his bed, his toy box, his closet and his dresser drawers. See, there are no ghosts around here, I said as I pulled covers over him. But what about the banging I was hearing? I looked around and opened the window curtains in his room. It's probably just the branch near the window, the wind probably making it hit it. I pulled the curtains close and kissed my son goodnight and went off to bed. For past nights my son keeps coming into my room for the same reason. At this point I was getting annoyed and told him he needed to stop listening to ghost stories with his friends at school. Until last night he said, I'm hearing voices in my room. At that time I thought he was just saying that to make me keep him in my bed, so I just brushed it off and put him back to bed. The next day though I was still thinking about what he said, like is he telling the truth or simply just making it up. That morning after I dropped my son off from school, I went into my closet and got out an old nanny cam that was placed in one of Todd's old teddy bears that I never thought I'd use this again. I used it to keep an eye on him when he was an infant that time. I went into his room with the bear and cleaned some of Todd's toys up in the process and closed the door and got ready to go to work. During that night it was pretty peaceful. Todd didn't come into my room that night, so I thought maybe he was making excuses. Or it was the branch scaring him, but since we don't have no wind right now it must have stopped. The next day I did the same routine with Todd and sent him to school. Before I went to work though, I took the bear out of the room and decided to look at the footage of the camera it took last night. I played the video suspecting the whole thing is just Todd sleeping in his bed, but what I saw 2 hours in the video sent a chill down my spine. I saw a man slowly coming out from my son's closet, creepily going close to him next to his bedside and starts just deeply staring at him. The footage of him just glancing at my son while he was sleeping was for an hour long. He then starts to quietly walk around his room, just casually touching stuff without trying to make noise. I was in such a state of panic and shock watching this video. When it was almost 5 in the morning I saw him quietly going back in the closet and quietly closed the door behind him. That quickly brought to my attention this guy is probably still in the house. That I raced out the door to the outside of the house and I quickly called 911 to get over here. A few minutes passed, then the police got here. At that time I was relieved they were here. It turns out the guy was living in the attic, which was in my son's closet. The police don't know how long he has been up there, but during those restless nights my son has been having, I'm guessing he was here for a while. The police took him into custody and was searching for more clues around the attic. One of the cops noticed there was a little peephole on the floor, and looking directly in it you can see on top of my son's bed. Which scared me. He has been watching my son every time he is in his room. During that time I swear to take my son a little more seriously since that day, and to make sure he will never know what ghost was really there watching him. Late one night, I was working alone in my home office, a small room illuminated only by the dim glow of my computer screen. The rest of the house was shrouded in darkness, and the only sound was the occasional creaking of the old wooden floorboards. As I typed away, focusing on my work, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. It was as if someone was watching me from the shadows. I paused, looking around the dimly lit room, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I shrugged it off as my imagination and returned to my work. However, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something move. I turned my head quickly, but again, nothing was there. My heart began to race, and a sense of unease filled the room. Deciding to investigate, I got up and turned on the lights. As the light flooded the room, I noticed that the window, which I always kept locked, was slightly open. A cold breeze was entering the room, carrying with it an unfamiliar, musty scent. I closed the window and checked every corner of the room, but found nothing amiss. I told myself it was just the wind and tried to focus on my work again. But the feeling of being watched persisted. Then, the unimaginable happened. The computer screen flickered and went black, plunging the room into darkness. I reached for the light switch, but the lights wouldn't turn on. Panic set in as I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight. As the phone's light pierced the darkness, I froze in terror. There, in the corner of the room, stood a shadowy figure, barely visible and completely still. I blinked, and it was gone. Just like that, the lights flickered back on, and my computer screen returned to normal. I was alone in the room, yet the air felt heavy with the presence of something unseen. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had just encountered something unexplainable, something that defied logic. From that night on, I never worked alone in my office after dark. The experience left me with an unshakable feeling of dread and the unnerving sensation that something was always lurking just out of sight, watching me from the shadows. I wasn't a true believer until I saw what I saw. Even though it was almost 20 years ago, it's something I think about often. It literally my whole life changed in the matter of 5 seconds. Since then I have become somewhat sensitive to things I can only explain as the supernatural. I was a super young mother to my first daughter who would turn 1 later that month. We used to live on this old curvy road where one end brings you to Lynchburg and the other to Appomattox. Like every morning back then, I was heading to Lynchburg, but of course I was speeding to make it on time to work for 5 a.m. There was this part of the trip where it had super sharp curves that were snake-like, with an uphill at the end of the snake. There would always be huge packs of deer in this area, so you literally go 5 miles an hour with all the curviness. This strip of road didn't have any houses for at least 3 miles each way. Even though it was 20 years ago, I still remember every single little detail, like the outside temp was 17 degrees to Usher's Confessions Part 2 was on the radio with the time being 4:43 a.m. I remember the Vanilla Tree car freshener, bro. I even remember what underwear I had on. I am sorry, but it's just nuts I even remember that stuff. I was speeding until I got to the top of the snake and slowed to a basic crawl, but as I was entering the top of the snake, Usher started coming in and out of the speakers while my whole dash was slowly dimming. Of course I had a mini panic attack thinking my car was dying, but was confused cause I still had plenty of power when I stepped on the gas. By the second curve I got the most intense feeling I've ever had in my life at this point. I can only explain it as pain, sadness, fear, coldness and just the feeling of being lost. All I could do was bawling my eyes out, like full-grown woman crying like baby. And as I reached my last curve before the uphill I saw him. I saw him leaning against the hill that was right next to the road. I first noticed his bare feet with his gray, tattered pants. Wait, it's the middle of the winter, where are his shoes, was my first thought. But then I seen his gray, thin strange jacket, one I've never seen one like that before in my life. As I slowly made my gaze to his face I realized he didn't have a face but rather just a shadow. I literally could make out every other detail but his face, it was just gone. You know how if you're going slow enough and you hit your brakes the red glow can see what's behind you in the mirrors? Well, this guy was just gone. And so wasn't all those emotional I had 2 seconds ago. I made it to work, with only being 2 minutes late. That day after work I decided to walk around the downtown Lynchburg historical building, something I've never done in the 5 months I worked there for. That was the day I learned what the Civil War solders actually looked like and discovered my road was used as a trail to Appomattox. I also had no clue when a soldier would die. They would steal anything useful off the fallen soldiers. I know what I saw that day, and I can't tell who or what side that soldier came from, because even though I thought I seen the color gray, it was really just a ghost. And do they even really have colors? Long ago was a terrifying night. I had the most chilling experience of my life. I was 15 years old, living in a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other. It was a peaceful place, or so I thought, until that unforgettable night. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me in the care of my older sister, Emma. She was 16 and loved the idea of being in charge. That night, we decided to watch late one night. I was working alone in my home office, a small room illuminated only by the dim glow of my computer screen. The rest of the house was shrouded in darkness, and the only sound was the occasional creaking of the old wooden floorboards. As I typed away, focusing on my work, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. It was as if someone was watching me from the shadows. I paused, looking around the dimly lit room, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I shrugged it off as my imagination and returned to my work. However, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something move. I turned my head quickly, but again, nothing was there. My heart began to race, and a sense of unease filled the room. Deciding to investigate, I got up and turned on the lights. As the light flooded the room, I noticed that the window, which I always kept locked, was slightly open. A cold breeze was entering the room, carrying with it an unfamiliar, musty scent. I closed the window and checked every corner of the room, but found nothing amiss. I told myself it was just the wind and tried to focus on my work again. But the feeling of being watched persisted. Then, the unimaginable happened. The computer screen flickered and went black, plunging the room into darkness. I reached for the light switch, but the lights wouldn't turn on. Panic set in as I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight. As the phone's light pierced the darkness, I froze in terror. There, in the corner of the room, stood a shadowy figure, barely visible and completely still. I blinked, and it was gone. Just like that, the lights flickered back on, and my computer screen returned to normal. I was alone in the room, yet the air felt heavy with the presence of something unseen. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had just encountered something unexplainable, something that defied logic. From that night on, I never worked alone in my office after dark. The experience left me with an unshakable feeling of dread and the unnerving sensation that something was always lurking just out of sight, watching me from the shadows. Because we thought it was just some of the other kids playing pranks. Later that night, I woke up to a weird tapping sound on my window. I was a bit scared because of the dark, but I mustered the courage to peek through the blinds. There, in the dim moonlight, I saw someone or something in all black standing in our backyard, just staring at the house. My heart raced. I ran to Emma's room and woke her up. When we both looked again, the figure was gone. The next day, we told our parents about the incident, but they said it was probably just a lost traveler or a neighbor's guest. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. The following night, the tapping returned, more persistent this time. It sounded like someone was intentionally trying to scare us. I told Emma and she called our parents, but there was no answer. We were alone and scared. Emma decided to call the police, but as soon as she picked up the phone, the tapping stopped. We felt relieved but still uneasy. We tried to sleep, but a sudden loud bang from downstairs jolted us awake. Emma grabbed a flashlight, and we tiptoed downstairs. The living room was a mess, books from the shelves were thrown onto the floor, and the couch cushions were scattered. Then we heard a whisper, a faint, eerie voice coming from the kitchen. It was singing a slow, haunting tune. Emma signaled for us to sneak back upstairs, but as we turned, the kitchen light flicked on by itself. We bolted upstairs, locked ourselves in my room, and pushed my dresser against the door. We huddled together, listening as footsteps started coming up the stairs, slow and heavy. They stopped right outside my room. The doorknob rattled gently, then more violently. We were trembling, holding each other tightly. The house went silent for a moment, then a voice, soft and raspy, spoke from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there, kids." We didn't respond. Then, the sound of footsteps receded. We stayed awake the whole night. We were so scared to breathe. In the morning, our parents came back and found us asleep in my room, the dresser still blocking the door. We explained everything, and they called the police. The officers found no signs of forced entry, but they did find footprints outside, beneath my window and around the house. After that incident, my parents installed security cameras and an alarm system. The police patrols in our area increased. But the scariest part was that they never caught the person who stalked and terrified us that night. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear a faint tapping, and I freeze, wondering if it's just my imagination or if my stalker has returned.